My name is Chad Beauchamp. I'm the manager for the Office of Marine Affairs for the Makah Tribal Council in the state of Washington. I am a member of the Makah tribe, and I'm the head of the Beauchamp family. It is my distinct pleasure to have on the panel Dr. Gerry Morishima. He is in our neck of the woods, and he has a national profile as well. You folks are fortunate enough to meet a living legend, I believe, in the area of tribal and federal relations. He's done work for many, many years defending treaty rights and developing strong, representing those rights to the federal and state governments. I am relieved at his presence. I wasn't sure who was coming. And then Kenny from Cruz, Gerry works for Cruz as well. So having said that,
thanks, Chad. I'm going to try to see if I can get the other PowerPoint going here. All right. Well, Fawn Sharp, who is the president of the Queen Nation, was supposed to be here today to address you and give you some of her comments and perspectives on the importance of Indian tribes being involved in climate policies and climate change initiatives. Fawn was taken ill last week, and she sends her regrets and asked me to attend on her behalf. So I'm going to give you a few minutes in terms of just a few perspectives on climate change and Indian tribes. I'm Gerry Morishima. I'm a technical advisor to the president of the Queen Nation. I work primarily in the area of natural resource management, forestry, fisheries, wildlife management, also federal policy. Give you a little bit of perspective, for over 10,000 years, this was Indian country. But it wasn't just a vast, untouched wilderness. This is a cover of a book by Charles Mann, 1491, of course, is the year before Columbus discovered America. But one of the things that people often forget is that North America was peopled. And there were many different cultures and peoples in North America. Those cultures were very distinctly related to the natural resources that were in particular locations. So, because of the presence of all these tribes and tribal cultures, tribal places, and diversity, the biological diversity and cultural diversity are very closely intertwined. And that's extremely important to remember when we're dealing with issues relating to factors such as climate change and the effects on local communities. But natural resources within Indian country have always been central to the cultures, lifeways, distinctness, identity, and the economies of those tribes. But tribes were more than just users. They were managers that had a profound stewardship ethic to provide for the needs of future generations. Over the years, with the European settlement of the continent, the tribal influence on the landscape waned, and tribes were by and large removed from their homelands and moved to small reservation lands that were set aside for their exclusive use and occupancy. As part of those arrangements, many tribes signed treaties with the United States and reserved certain rights. Other tribes did not sign treaties with the United States and retained those rights. Those rights have not been extinguished. They're Aboriginal rights and inherent to those people. The tribes are often overlooked sovereigns. They are distinct political sovereigns with territorial and reserved rights. Tribes as sovereigns have rights to self-determination without diminishment of federal trust obligations or responsibilities. And as political sovereigns, the relationship between Indian tribes and the United States and the states all occur on a government-to-government basis. That means, of course, that tribes as distinct sovereigns have territorial dominion over their lands and their peoples. So they must participate in the formulation and implementation of policies affecting climate. Tribal sovereignty and self-determination is really at the core of what tribal concerns are with respect to climate change. Joan Dela Cruz, who was a very dear friend of mine, was a dear friend of mine for many, many years, was the chairman of the Quinault Nation for over 25 years. And during his leadership, the Quinault Nation was a major force in terms of the development of policies with respect to tribal self-governance and tribal self-determination. The people of the Quinault and the other coastal tribes are people of the land and sea. They're unique in that they have treaty-protected property rights to use and manage coastal resources. They have rights to hunt, fish, and gather over extensive coastal and marine geographic areas extending far offshore. And coastal tribes have been represented for many years on domestic and international regulatory bodies dealing with factors such as fisheries management. Another factor to remember when you're dealing with the tribes on the coast is that there is a special relationship between Indian tribes and the United States. There is a trust relationship that carries with it certain fiduciary obligations. Because of the treaties that coastal tribes have with the United States is obligated to honor its commitments as the supreme law of the land. The treaties are protected by the U.S. Constitution. And because Indian lands are held in trust, the fiduciary standards require that management actions taken by the United States must be in the best interests of the tribal beneficiaries. That means that public policy objectives have to be subordinate to the duty and obligation to protect the interests of the tribal beneficiaries. It also means that when we're dealing with things like the spatial planning or the imposition of regulatory restrictions that may have general application, that those restrictions and regulations cannot diminish the potential value of the trust corpus, the trust estate, the land and natural resources. And they can't be impinged upon without incurring certain liabilities for taking. Other factors of concern to coastal communities are climate change and social justice. Tribal communities are among the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Because they're place-oriented, they're sensitive to and uniquely impacted by climate change. The International Panel on Climate Change and other entities have noted in their reports the specific vulnerability of Indian tribes and tribal communities to the effects of climate change. This is heightened in many cases by many tribes being restricted to their reservation boundaries, so they can't relocate. Those tribes as well are limited and depend upon resource availability at specific times and places. For example, runs of salmon that go to particular river systems where the tribes fish. That means for climate impacts that some adaptation strategies involving relocation may not be acceptable. Because these are their tribes and ancestral homelands, and they have adjudicated rights to very specific resources that cannot be transferred. It also means that tribes are wary of solutions that are often imposed or developed by the larger society. Solutions such as carbon trading systems that end up displacing environmental costs. Those of you who may be familiar with the discussion and the deliberations that have been going on in the Kyoto Protocol and Copenhagen and Cancun are familiar perhaps with a term called REDD, which is dealing with the reduction of emissions from deforestation and fragmentation. But one of the things about REDD is that what this does, it allows corporations to purchase carbon credits and continue to pollute, continue their pollution in their place. So instead of rectifying the problems, what they're doing is they're trying to buy their way out of it. But what's happened in areas like Bolivia and in South America is that corporations have gone in and displaced tribal peoples and replaced their tribal forest with eucalyptus plantations. eucalyptus plantations being fast-growing, store a lot of carbon, but they also suck up a lot of water, and they also end up causing many environmental problems in terms of the chemicals that those plants leave on the ground. But more importantly, what it's done to the tribal communities is displace them, is deprive them of their traditional ways of using and managing their lands. So that's why this issue of RAD and carbon trading is of such controversy, because it allows other entities to benefit without the tribe's consent.
Well, children, during this session, we had time for crack my teeth, but how this thing to use upon the UN and things like that. I wanted to know how the Forum on Indigenous Peoples Declaration for Indigenous Peoples' Rights from the UN was being utilized as a tool, and how that was faring in regard to many of the indigenous peoples' negotiations with the United States and in regard to international human rights law. So I thought this answer was interesting enough that I wanted to make sure that we shared it with you on Gullah Geechee TV, because Hunter know this year the what going on.
And provide testimony at that session. And it was clear at that session that one of the challenges that the Native peoples of the United States face is that the United States was the last holdout in agreeing to adopt the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
Right.
And it was only through the extraordinary pressures and commitment of the Obama administration that was finally turned around. But one of the factors that we wanted to emphasize is that the challenge of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples really deals with the separation of political states versus subordinate states, the tribes. And the United States and Canada and New Zealand were amongst those countries that opposed the UN Declaration because they were concerned about what the implications might be in terms of their flexibility and potential liability, I guess, in terms of what that means. It really means that there has to be an increased recognition and support for the ability of tribes to participate in decisions that are affecting their own destinies. It needs self-determination, it means self-governance, it means respect, it means dialogue on a government-to-government basis, and not something that can be pushed aside through something that is thrown around as the term consultation. And consultation has really become a four-letter word in Indian country. It's you talk, we decide. Because from the standpoint of the federal government, they may seek consultation, they may seek comment, but they reserve to themselves the right to decide. And that's not what has to happen with respect to the ability of tribes to be able to take their place in the political landscape. Tribes, the Quinault and some of the other tribes in the United States have attempted to participate in the discussions on climate change and the development of the new replacement for the Kyoto Protocol. But tribes have been relegated to an NGO status. So they're treated like a non-governmental entity rather than the political sovereigns that they are.
Right.
What's happening in that forum is that the tribes are working with other nations and other indigenous peoples around the world through the United Nations Forum in order to try to get a permanent place and a permanent recognition for tribal presence in many of the policies and decisions that are coming before the UN now.
Thank you.